Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. This is the second part of my conversation with Dr. John, where we begin to shift from understanding narcissism to asking a deeper and more challenging question: can it actually change? In this segment, we explore what makes somebody capable of benefiting from treatment. From there, we move into what really makes therapy work, not just insight, but the emotional experience of staying with discomfort rather than escaping into defensiveness. We also get into the heart of narcissistic relationships, why building trust takes time, how distorted inner representations of self and others shape the way someone experiences the other person, and what it means to work through these distortions in real time. And don't worry, if that sounds confusing, we're going to get into all that in greater detail. But when I say, and I quote, work through these distortions, this isn't just about therapy. You'll likely recognize these moments in your own relationships too. When something small feels like rejection, when intentions get misread, or when conflict escalates quickly, we talk about how staying with those moments, rather than reacting or reassuring the other person of your good intentions, and how this can begin to create something new, both in the therapy room and in everyday relationships. If you're interested in how real change begins to take shape, both in therapy and in everyday relational life, let's move right into that part of the conversation. Before we get into what's mutative, like what really does help, let's just start out with what's necessary to even think about. Like, or is there something in your mind that's even necessary when someone comes in to say that they're even capable, or that there's some potential here that they could benefit from therapy, right? And that change is possible, or some kind of healing is possible?
There's so many different factors that go into play to help people sort of imagine a future self, a future just in general, that is better than what it is in that moment that they come for therapy. And it's not uncommon for people to be in a rather hopeless state. And so it's about trying to understand why they're there, what they want to get out of it,
Yeah.
and shape some version of the future that aligns with what those aspirations might be. And sometimes it might be, very often people will come to therapy, folks struggling with narcissism will come to therapy because somebody else has essentially mandated it.
Yes.
And so why are they there? Well, my wife told me I have to come. So I can imagine, you don't really want to be here. So what's a good outcome for you that will work for you and your wife? It could be starting as simple as that, to try to engage them and own part of the process so they feel that they get something useful out of it.
So what might you hear, just to stay with that example? That's an interesting one, because I experience this obviously quite frequently as well, that patients are referred, sometimes even the wife contacts me initially and like, can you help my husband? So if you engage them in that way, are they typically able to come up with something that they would want to get out of the process?
Not always, but sometimes they will acknowledge some aspects of the relationship that, he and his wife have, and acknowledge that, yeah, maybe things aren't as good as they can or should be. I'll let him define what that is. And it's like, okay, well, that sounds like something that we can work on together to make better. Not necessarily to please your wife, but to actually make you feel better about the relationship. And
Yeah.
so it could be something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sometimes what I hear is, I heard something similar from my daughter, or I heard something similar from my second wife. Maybe they're on like their third wife now, or third
Sure.
relationship. And I think I need to pay attention to this. I mean, I'm not sure even exactly what I need to pay attention to, because I'm not even sure this is an accurate portrayal of who I am. It certainly doesn't feel like who I am, but I'm hearing it more often, and I don't really want another divorce or separation or whatever it is they're going through. It's not like when someone comes in, they have to be insightful,
No.
or take responsibility for the problems in their marriage. You hear that sometimes is they won't take any responsibility, which is true. But how many people come into therapy, like overall, saying that it's their responsibility and they're so insightful and they want to work, I mean, this is where we get them over time, right? But so that's something that I hear is there's some recognition, and that opens the door just a little bit,
Yeah.
because then if there's a little bit of recognition that this, and I would tell them that this is a pattern in your life, would suggest that there's something more complicated going on deep inside of you. And that's something then that we can certainly think about together. Sure.
Yeah, and in the example that you gave about, well, maybe he's on his third wife, and maybe there's something going on that, my relationships aren't working out. This has happened a number of times, and the guys will come in and they'll often complain about how expensive it is to get divorced. And so it's like, oh, well, let's work on this. Maybe we can figure out what's going on. So A, you can not only have better relationships, but B, so you can, not have these very expensive experiences anymore.
Yeah. I do hear that one too. Well, you're very expensive, Doc, but this is going to be less expensive than another divorce. So
Exactly.
I guess I'll give it a shot. But that's good, because we could say that's a rationalization perhaps, right? Maybe that is really the way they think, or maybe they just need a rationalization to come in, because you mentioned shame a little bit earlier, John, that could be very shaming then to come into treatment. Then you have to admit something is wrong, or that I have a need and I'm putting myself out there, making myself vulnerable. And that's one of the sort of central pieces of shame, at least the way that I think about it, is when you actually extend yourself. Like, it's easy to hide and avoid shame, if you're in what Steiner calls a psychic retreat. I talk a lot about that on my podcast, but it's a withdrawn state. It's not making contact. There's no skin in the game. Now
Exactly.
they're coming in for treatment. They can rationalize it in that way. And that's when you really have to be sensitive. And, I mentioned earlier, appreciating the subjectively useful component of something that's maladaptive is part of the treatment process. It doesn't mean condoning it, but you have to appreciate it at that moment, because they're there, they're in treatment, and you have to start somewhere, because sometimes they're like, oh, they're not people, who attack them say they're not insightful, but it's not true. It's not like they're not insightful. They're probably, oftentimes they're not insightful, but other moments they can be quite insightful. So when that door opens a little bit, we have to be very respectful of it and see if we could try to leave it open a little bit longer.
Absolutely. And even what you were just talking about, when they first come in, is acknowledging how difficult that likely is, and helping them feel good about taking that very difficult step.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we mentioned this at the top of the hour. What about, I said, what's mutative? Like, what works in treatment? So if you think about treatment approaches, what's actually effective in trying to help somebody? I mean, look at you and I are describing so much here already, right? It started with the grandiose sense of self. We spoke about splitting, right? We wanted to start thinking about, so then how do you help somebody who's maybe so defended against, and they're not open to that, exposing that more vulnerable part of themselves? Like, how do we begin? Or how would you begin, John, to work with somebody? Or what do you see as helpful in terms of the treatment process?
Let's take a quick break.
Are you tired of feeling like you're walking on eggshells all the time? Do you feel drained, confused, or like nothing you do is ever good enough? Are you stuck in a cycle of elation, then criticism and confusion? If any of this sounds familiar, you're not alone. And that's exactly why I created Office Hours with Dr. Anthony Mazzella. That's me. Office Hours is a low-cost, small group space where you could bring your questions about narcissistic traits and dynamics and the places where you feel stuck. You'll be met with honest, grounded feedback. I'll hold the group with structure, but there's also space for real conversation. This is a space designed for anyone looking for clarity, insight, and support. If that sounds like you, just click the link in the show notes to join us. Okay, I hope to see you there.
From the very beginning, it's about building the relationship. I'm not so worried about getting into deep stuff right off the bat, as I was alluding to a little while ago. That can be very, very scary for a lot of folks. So it's like, I may be able to pick up on things right away, and it's like, I have a pretty clear sense of where we need to go, But if you dive into that deeply right off the bat, you're probably going to lose them. And
Yes.
so it is about developing a relationship where they can trust you.
Mhm.
And that may sound easy. Oh, well, in developing a good trusting relationship. It's not. It's really hard because a lot of times folks will come in and they'll be rather suspicious. Sometimes, they'll just not want to be there, as we were talking a little while ago. So it's about, I'm here to work with you, to help you get from this what you want and need. And they may not really fully understand what they want and need, but I do, as I was sharing a couple of minutes ago, trying to get them to think about something that might be a good outcome from them. And that's a starting point.
Yeah.
And neither they or nor I really know where we're going to end up. I think usually I have a clearer sense of what that could be than they do, and we'll get there. This is not a short-term perspective. This is a long journey that we go on together. And I let them know that because often they'll ask, well, how long does this take? And it's like, I can't give you an answer. And nobody worth their weight in salt is going to give you that answer.
Oh, I give them an answer. I give them an answer to that, John, just so you know.
Oh, how long do you say then?
I tell them it depends.
Oh,
It
well,
depends.
that's
I
not,
know.
the answer they want is like 3 weeks, 3 months. So that,
I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're saying, but it depends on the pace that we can move. And who knows at what pace we're going to move because of, again, things you and I spoke about. Even though the grandiose structure we said is like, that's what holds the fragmented self together. But we don't know how rigidified, how ossified it is. And it depends on the level of disturbance. So with some people, there's a little bit more fluidity there. So defenses can come down a little bit more quickly, whereas other people, it may be deeply entrenched. And you say anything, again, just a separate opinion. We mentioned this earlier, and they can become highly reactive and defensive. I don't want to say it slows down the process because it really doesn't in a way. It's all grist for the analytic mill. That's the
Right.
way I think about it, is then it becomes part of the treatment process. But yeah, no, you're right. I was just being playful a little bit when I said I
yeah,
answered.
I think we're getting at the same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
So I appreciate something else you said, which is even though you may have some conceptual understanding of what's going on, you're not necessarily going to tell them that. Like you have to build like what you called is trust. Like you're building trust, right? You're building what's called a therapeutic relationship in my field. And that takes time because I just want to add something to what you said earlier and see what you think about this. Because when you were saying it takes time to build trust, it's not an easy task. I was thinking that the audience may be saying, why? Why does it take so much time? Like months or years? And in part, it's because something I mentioned earlier with self-other representations is they already have a representation of you in their mind. In other words, they have an expectation of how you're going to treat them. So even if you're trying to be nice and supportive and comforting, that does not mean that it's going to be received in that way. This stuff gets distorted based on past experiences around trauma or whatever their childhood was, which you and I didn't even talk about yet, or today at least. But the point is, you can't just be a good object and expect that that's going to get taken in and they're going to start to trust you, because that does get distorted. But I'm curious how you think, or do you think about it that way, John? Or what?
100%. And in fact, that's the reason it takes so long for them to trust us, to see us in a way as a whole person. Once they start doing that, that is a reflection that we're doing the work that we need to with them. But it's a long journey to get there. And if we get back to the core struggle that these folks are having, feeling not good enough, that somehow if that not good enough sense of self was exposed to others, they're going to be abandoned, rejected, ridiculed, shamed. And so that's their expectation of us when we start. And so we can't be that person. So we get back into, the fundamentals of developing a good relationship is being consistent in our behavior, unconditional acceptance and empathy and positive regard for the person. And this all sounds very lovely and simple, but sometimes it's not easy for us.
Yeah.
And so we have to be attentive to how we are reacting to the person in the same way, thinking about how they're reacting to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just add in a couple more ingredients that I find helpful is clearing away the distortions. Like that's something that really takes priority in my opinion, because
Yep.
you could be there playing this role. And if you get like a good compliant type of narcissist that's always just looking, to make sure that you love them and that you're on the same page, kind of like a PG rated treatment, I would call it, you could think that everything's going along really well. So we're looking at not just what we call, again, I'm sure you're familiar with this language, John, like you mentioned, like what we call counter transference, like thinking about your own feelings. So we have to think about our own feelings and use that as data, in terms of what's going on with their feelings, right? So it's like the transference and the counter transference are corollary. They go together to some extent. So one other thing that I'm always keeping my eye on, which I find to be really helpful, is what's going on in the transference. In other words, in the relationship, in the moment at that time between the two of us, because some of these patients come in, I'm finding this more and more these days, and I wonder if this is your experience, they could have insight. Like many of the patients I'm getting today have been in treatment, some of them on and off for years, or some of them are very invested. They've done their research and they read up on narcissism and they understand a lot that they had this traumatic history. And so some of them come in at that level, but it doesn't put a dent in the nature of their interpersonal relationships. And then they'll say, look, doc, nothing has changed. Like I've been to this retreat, I've done this kind of therapy, I've done this, and nothing changed. My wife is still saying that I'm aloof. So I think there's a big difference between an intellectual understanding of these concepts and then an emotionally lived experience in the room as we go through it together. But I'm curious what you think about that.
That's a very good distinction to make, because very often I will experience the same thing, is that some very intelligent people that intellectually they get it. Sometimes it's almost like, wow, like you have a depth of understanding that many highly skilled and experienced therapists have. Like, you get this, but there's an absolute disconnect between that intellect and the emotional aspect of their lives. It's like there's a massive divide, and it's that latter part, it's the emotional aspect, where sometimes things need to get raw and not uncommonly difficult in the room. You have to let them bring that out. There's a fear of often being overwhelmed by emotions, or a fear of what our reaction will likely be. And so there's this defensiveness, guardedness that they have. And it's like, yeah, I understand all this, but I've not allowed myself to take the risk to actually feel about it.
Yeah, let me just ground this in a really simple example. So a patient gets upset when I give them the bill, right? Or I end the session on time, that I cut them off, and that it's evidence that I don't care about them. So in my approach, in the psychodynamic approach, and I think you're probably right there, John, but it's good for the audience to hear this. It's not about reassuring them, that I do care. And this goes back to anybody who has somebody like this in their life. Reassurance doesn't work. And I think they probably learned that early on. It works maybe just for a moment. Or on the other end, if somebody's listening to this who struggles with these characteristics and you're looking for reassurance, what happens is we can always reassure, right, John, that no, that's not true. It's just, it was the end of the session and you're right. Maybe I should be a little more sensitive to it. Instead, what it looks like is something like, oh, how difficult. Like I have to acknowledge first, like validate, like how difficult that must be to be sitting with somebody, for so long. And then to think that I don't really care about you, that I can so easily just end the session like that. And by the way, this is also what we call projection, right? Because it's usually them, we were saying this earlier, who can easily end a relationship if there's not a deeper connection. But any matter. So that's staying in that very uncomfortable moment. It's easier, to just say, no, that's not true. But the harder work is saying, tell me what that's about, right? Like, what's it like sitting with somebody session after session who you feel doesn't care? So I'm not reassuring them immediately. No, I do care.
It's a good example because it gives us an opportunity because just the same as they often cannot integrate these disparate parts of themselves, they can't think of us in the same way. And it's like, if you care about me, how could you do that? But me sort of maintaining my professional boundaries and acknowledging the fact, well, you know what, I have another patient right now. It's like, it doesn't mean that I don't care about you. But we have to suspend that discussion because, yes, the time's up. I've got to see somebody else. You must go. But we'll bring this up. And it's like, think about this for a little while. And even if you remain really pissed off at me when you come in next Tuesday, that's good stuff to talk about. And
Yes.
it's necessary for those kinds of experiences to occur to really get deeper.
Yeah. And not easy. And this is where a
No.
certain level of skill, and training and experience comes in terms of looking for a therapist, anybody out there who's shopping around, because sometimes we have to sit in this, John. I'm sure this has been your experience. I see patients anywhere from once to 4 times a week. So could you imagine sitting with somebody maybe 2, 3 times a week who's upset that you don't care and you're not reassuring them? So you have to sit through and help them begin to understand their own subjective experience, that this is their experience of you. And if you can open that up instead of just reassuring them, that's the kind of stuff that, to go back to that word we used earlier, that's the kind of stuff that's mutative. Because to your point, John, this is what's going to lead to integration. In other words, that I can have somebody in my life, maybe they do care, right? But maybe they also did need to end the session as well. So now you got 2 things going on, and that's complicated, but that's part of a whole object relationship.
Exactly. And the part where you were saying the reassurance, we often feel like if we're in that position, we're reassuring to make them feel better. It's often we're trying to do it to make ourselves feel better. And you were talking about the countertransference and the critical role that it plays in good therapy. It's really important to understand ourselves, reflect on our own reactions, and how that may shape how we engage with our patients.
Yes. Excellent point. Thank you. I think that may be a good place for us to start to wrap it up. But before we end, is there anything that I missed or anything else that you would like to add, John, to the discussion?
Well, we could go on for this for days, but I think we covered quite a bit.
Okay.
What I'll do is I'll take the opportunity to reinforce something that I said earlier, because I think it deserves it, is if folks that are listening because they have a person in their life who they may find challenging because they suspect the person's struggling with aspects of narcissism, it's really important for us to open our mind to the reality of these folks as struggling, with the addendum that you put forth around those with malignant narcissism. But it's like, for us to be in a position to help at all, we have to understand that even though we may be insulted by them or their behavior and find them offensive, there is an aspect of empathy that is still required. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is necessary. If you want this person to continue having a role in your life, then there is a role that we play, and it's through educating themselves, like with this podcast, that are really important.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and enrich my listeners with a very unique and different perspective on these really complicated topics. So thank you again, John.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Great. There's still so much more to say about this, but we have to stop here for now. If this spoke to you and you're curious to learn more about all issues related to narcissism, please support the show by subscribing so you don't miss what's coming next. And even more importantly, take a moment to leave a review. Reviews make the podcast easier for others to find, which helps the show grow. The more the show grows, the more I can invest in creating thoughtful content that supports you in understanding and navigating your experiences with narcissism. Okay, thanks for being here with me. I'm grateful we got to explore this one together. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.